In rural southern Illinois, a toy company began selling realistic baby dolls to expectant mothers. But apparently, after the mother had her child, the toy baby would start crying. Eventually, the rocking motion advertised to calm it down wouldn't work, and you couldn't get it to stop without shaking it. Eventually, when it started crying, the parent would have to beat it, and the beatings and thrashings would have to get harder and harder to get it to be quiet. The only thing that seemed to shut the baby doll up permanently was to bash its head against the wall to destroy whatever mechanism triggered the crying. On more than one occasion, though, neighbors called the authorities to report child abuse, and when the police arrived, they found the bloody remains of infants smeared across the walls and the floor. In most cases, the mother couldn't understand why the police were there. She just got rid of the stupid doll, as she rocked a baby-shaped bundle in her arms. The following auction is true. I will not be mentioning any names here, as I do not want any of my family or friends to be hounded by people wanting more information. The only one who would know anything other than me would be my fiancé anyway. If anyone has questions, they can be asked of me directly. I please ask that no one try to contact my fiancé, as she has gone through quite enough with this ordeal. Pictures are at the bottom of the page. Okay. I've come to the last thing I can think of to get rid of this accursed thing, but I'll get to that later. Last summer, my fiancé and I were visiting her family in Florida, and taking a stop in Disney World. As big fans of the Lilo and Stitch movies, we were interested in buying some Stitch toys. We ended up getting a few of all shapes and sizes. We have had no problem with any of them. They're all regular friggin' teddy bears. One, however, has been a problem since day one. That was the one we picked up on our way from Orlando to Daytona Beach. We stopped at a little out-of-the-way place while looking for a restaurant. This place was small and kinda dingy, but they had food and a gift shop, if you could call it that. I wish I could remember what it was called, but the only thing that seems to ring a bell is Leary. Anyway, they had another Stitch toy there which looked just as good as any we had picked up in Disney World, and was a quarter of the price. The person behind the till seemed a little too pleased to be making the sale, and now I can see why. Anyway, we visited my fiancé's family and flew back home without any incident. We thought we had just had a normal vacation. We displayed the toy on our TV stand with some other stuffed animals my fiancé had collected over the years. Nothing has ever moved them, except for when cleaning and dusting, and then they are promptly put back in place. After the new Stitch toys were put up, about once a week, we would find one or two of the other stuffed animals on the floor on certain mornings when we would get up. Originally thinking nothing of the fact, we have a dog who we thought may have bumped the stand, but more on him later. We would put the animals back up on the stand. This became a semi-regular occurrence until early November, when we awoke to a loud slam in the middle of the night. I got my fiancé to stay upstairs and crept down to see what was happening. I had the light on at the top of the stairs, which meant I could not see clearly into the living room to see what had happened. But I did notice different things scattered on the floor. I turned the light on at the front door, and saw that the items on the floor were actually all of the stuffed animals and other Stitch toys. The only thing left on our TV stand was the Stitch we had picked up from that store. That would have been enough, but the top of the TV was cracked as well. It looked as though something heavy had been dropped onto it. We still have no idea what happened there. At this point, I knew that there was something wrong with this toy. So right then and there, I threw it in the garbage in our kitchen cupboard. I put the stuffed animals back as well as I could, and went back up to bed to explain to my fiancé why that Stitch would not be on the shelf when she got up in the morning. Since I didn't want to scare her, I told her it got ripped open when it fell off the shelf and I had to throw it away, as it looked too bad to repair. Sleep was hard to come by that night. The next day, I got up early, emptied the garbage, and threw it in the dumpster in the parking lot before leaving for work. Problem solved. Or so I thought. Later that morning, I got a call from my fiancé asking why I thought it would be funny to joke about throwing one of her stuffed toys away. I explained that I put it in the dumpster that morning, and she asked why it was still on the shelf. Both doors were still locked, and no windows or anything were broken. I left work early. As soon as I got home, I explained to my fiancé what had happened, and told her I was getting rid of the toy. I grabbed it and left, and drove out to a Safeway that was a few blocks away. I tossed the thing in the dumpster there, and took off for home. Thankfully, that time, it didn't come back. For 4 days. The strangest thing is that it was clean. It looked like it had never left the house. Trying to dump the Stitch in different places, on the other side of the city and such, became a regular thing. Since no one believed us when we tried to tell the story, there was nothing else we could really do. Thankfully, neither my fiancé nor I were seriously hurt at all. The only injury worth mentioning was it had tripped me, as far as I can tell, as I walked down our front steps one day. I didn't notice it was there when leaving the house, and I definitely caught my foot on something. And when I turned around, it was there. Thank God I only got a scraped knee and palm. Christmas was thankfully quiet in regards to our problem. Unfortunately, right after the New Year, the worst came. I had taken the teddy out to the landfill site just outside of the city limits, and buried it under any other debris I could find close by. It had been close to 3 weeks since we had seen the thing, and we were starting to think that the nightmare was over. In the early evening, on a Thursday, I let our dog outside, just as we normally do all the time. After he had been outside for about 10 minutes, I thought maybe he had found some food or something else to eat, as he usually does. I looked outside and saw him laying in the snow, and he wasn't moving. I ran outside and grabbed him, and noticed the Stitch toy laying beside him. Our dog was breathing, but unconscious. I rushed him inside and called the vet. We were able to take him to the emergency clinic, and after examining him, we were told that they could notice nothing actually wrong with him. It appeared that he had just passed out, but his blood pressure was extremely high and he was still having problems breathing. They kept him overnight for observation, which was good, because I wanted him kept as safe as possible. When we got home, we decided to burn the toy in our fireplace, but we could not get it to light. We even tried lighter fluid, but as soon as it touched him, it was completely absorbed. He did not feel damp and did not smell of the fluid. If we could not burn it, we would incapacitate it. I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut off each arm and leg, and the head. I took the 6 pieces, put them in a garbage bag, tied the top, and put it outside on the front step to get rid of it in the morning. The next morning, I went outside to get Stitch, and the bag was gone. I could not find it anywhere in our yard or in the parking lot. I went back inside, and there it was. The toy was back on the TV stand, and it looked like it had never been touched. Not a speck of dirt, not a rip or tear on it. I grabbed the toy, ran to the car, went downtown, and ran into the first pawn shop I could find. The owner said they did not take used stuffed toys as they can be dirty. I told him that he could have it for free. I just didn't want it. He started to ask why, but I left it on the counter and ran out of the store. I thought maybe if someone else were to buy it, it would stay with them and away from us. February was a great month. Our dog was healthy, and my fiancé and I were able to sleep peacefully, as the Stitch was nowhere to be seen. I felt bad that maybe we had put the curse on someone else, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. 2 days ago, it came back. I opened the front door to go to work Monday morning, and it was sitting on the front step facing me. I put it in the house, pinned it under our TV, and told my fiancé about it, and to leave the house as fast as possible. After discussing what to do for a few days, we decided that we really have no other option than to try to list this on eBay and get it as far away from ourselves as possible. We do not want to send it to someone who is not expecting it, and we want to send it to someone who is asking for it. This is why the opening bid is a penny and there is no reserve. We just want to get rid of it. Thankfully, it has stayed under the TV up until now, with no real signs of change. I don't want to sound like a wuss, but this bear is the scariest thing I have ever experienced, and I am a horror fanatic. It may look like a regular stuffed toy, but it is evil. Please, if you have children or pets, think twice before bidding. This is not a toy for a child. I cannot say with any assurance that you will have the same experiences as us, but there is a strong likelihood that you will see what I mean, and I do not want to feel any guilt for harm coming to a child or an animal. We also cannot guarantee that the item will stay with you after you have received it. If it stays as persistent as it has previously, it may try to get back to us. I will not be putting a return address on the package, as if when you realize that this item is evil, as I'm sure you will, I do not want you sending it back to us. It will become your responsibility as soon as it enters your possession. The buyer is to pay for shipping in whatever form they like. I can dismember the item before shipping as well if you would feel safer that way, but I cannot guarantee it will arrive in this form. If you would like the toy shipped without being cut up, I will attempt to immobilize it with either duct tape or rope or a combination of the two. It is your choice. Payment accepted for this auction is PayPal only. I do this because I do not want the winning buyer to have my address for the same reason listed above. Again, I have to warn you that if you have children or pets, please think about what you are bidding on. We are not responsible for anything that happens after this item leaves our possession. Serious bidders only, please. I do not want to have to keep this for any longer than I have to. 10 days for the auction is already pushing it, but I want it to actually be sold, so I need as many people to see it as possible. If you have less than 20 feet back, please let me know you are serious before bidding. Lastly, if you have any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Whenever I'm sad and lonely, I talk to my doll, Anna. She always has a smile on her face, and every time I see her, I'm happy because she's always happy. She makes me smile just as much as her, but when I show Anna to Mommy, Anna has a frown on her face. Mommy just says,
"It's not funny, Dakota. Anna doesn't smile."
But Anna doesn't just make people smile. She also makes them scream. I came home one night from first grade and Mommy got angry at me for no reason at all. I ran up to my room and as I cried, I told Anna what happened. She just smiled at me, which made me feel a lot better. I hugged Anna and put her back on the shelf where she always was, and then crawled into bed and went to sleep. Later that night, I heard screaming coming from downstairs. I got scared, so I put on slippers and ran down the stairs. It sounded almost like Mommy screaming, and it was coming from the kitchen. I ran into the kitchen and stared in horror. It was Anna beside Mommy with her back to me. A long, pointed knife was sticking out of Mommy's chest, and there was a pool of blood on the floor. I walked closer, picking up Anna and looking at her closer. Anna's porcelain face was covered in blood. Her blue eyes were wide with blood covering them, too. I hugged Anna and thanked her several times. Then I examined her face again. In my arms, the doll smiled in gratitude.
Oh, does time go by fast. Seems as though only yesterday my little brother and I were only kids. I'm 25 now and he is 24. I left the nest a few years ago. My brother, being somewhat of a mama's boy, is only now starting to move out on his own. He is renting a little apartment not too far from home. He and I decided to raid our family's storage unit because he hardly has any furniture in his new apartment. We went the next day and saw a few decent pieces of furniture, a desk, a coffee table, and our old couch. "What's in all these old boxes anyway?" I asked while scanning the room. My brother dusted one of the plastic boxes off and read the label. "Toys." "Here, I think these are yours," he said as he slid the box my way. I could see some dolls and ponies through the clear orange plastic. I opened it up, and a big smile grew on my face. There were some of my favorite toys in here. Animal figurines, an assortment of Beanie Babies, a Slinky, bouncy balls, and much more. I saw a paw sticking out of the pile and pulled on it. A strange-looking stuffed animal emerged from the rubble. It was like a teddy bear, but it had big round cheeks and funny protruding eyes with the lids halfway down, so he looked like he was stoned or sleepy. He was also wearing red pajamas with blue trim and holding a yellow flashlight that was sewed to his hand. "Hey, look, it's Bubba! Do you remember him?" He turned around from the box he was searching and squinted his eyes at the bear. "Oh yeah, I remember him. Let me see," he said as he reached out his hand. He inspected the bear for a minute and then pressed the button on his flashlight. Nothing happened. He chuckled and tossed the bear back to me. "This guy was crazy. What did he used to say?" I scratched my head. Before I could think, my brother mimicked the bear. "Let's go in the closet. Are we in the closet? I'm gonna turn on my flashlight." We both laughed. "Oh yeah." I mimicked another phrase. "Hey, You know what would be fun? Let's go under the covers. Are we under the covers? Okay, tickle me. Whoa! That tickles. We laughed harder until we both sighed. My brother looked at the ground for a moment and then at me. He said some weird stuff. Do you remember? I remember once he told us to go into Mom's room and turn off the lights. Do you remember that? Yeah, I remember that. Remember when Cousin Abby took him from us? Yeah, and he was like, "Hey, don't touch me," and she screamed and ran. We both reflected for a moment until I broke the silence. Yeah, he was crazy. We should get going. Mom wants us to come over for dinner. We packed up the boxes and secured the furniture in the truck. Later that night, after we unloaded everything, we went to our childhood home. We visited with our grandmother and our aunt for a bit, and I decided to help my mom cook. Did you find something he could use, honey? She said while chopping carrots. Oh yeah, our old couch still looks good in some pieces of furniture. We looked through our old toys, Ma. I thought you threw them away? Oh no, I want to keep those. When you have kids of your own, you can show them your old toys. Thanks, Ma. I want to put batteries in Bubba and see if he still works. You remember Bubba? Oh yes, Bubba. He was your guy's favorite. You two had such an imagination back then. You used to blame everything on Bubba. Both of you insisted he spoke to you. Wait, what? I don't remember thinking he said anything other than what he was programmed to say. What do you mean, dear? He wasn't programmed to say anything. Yeah, he was. He said a bunch of different phrases. I stopped stirring and looked at her. She grabbed the pepper across from me and patted me on the shoulder. Nice try, honey. You may be grown-ups, but I'm only 52. My memory hasn't gone yet. When I bought him for you two, the only thing he had was that flashlight. Even that you had to turn on yourself. She grabbed a plate of appetizers and walked into the living room. I stood there, speechless. She must be wrong. I remember clearly. He did speak to us. He did. I tried to put it out of my mind for the rest of the visit. We said our goodbyes and I offered to drive my brother home. It was dark now, around 8:30. I turned the radio down a little bit. Hey, I was talking to Mom about Bubba, and she insisted that he was never programmed to say anything. She said we were making it up and the only thing he had was that flashlight. What? Nah. She's wrong. She bought us tons of toys over the years. She's probably thinking of something else. I distinctly remember times when he talked to us. Me too. We pulled up to his apartment complex, and he got out of the car. Just before he closed the door, he leaned down and said, "Don't worry about it, sis. She's wrong." He waved as I pulled away. When I got home, I opened my laptop and searched for the Bubba doll. After several searches, nothing came up. I typed in, "Teddy bear with flashlight 90s toy." This was him. However, his name just said, "Flashlight Teddy." I clicked on link after link to see if there were different versions. I found some on Amazon. They were all the same. Just the light turned on, nothing else. A wave of discomfort fell over me as I sunk down into my chair. I pulled out my phone from my purse and texted my brother. Mom was right. Google flashlight Teddy. Occasionally, I have nightmares about Bubba. I dream he shows up in my apartment or my mom brings him home. I've been trying to block it out, but it always comes back. And neither my brother or I will go into that storage unit to this day. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my parents gave me a bright, red, old landline phone that had ceased to work long ago. My mom said that I played with that thing all the time. She said she often heard me mention the name Mr. Smith. Of course, she just brushed it off, as it was likely that I had an imaginary friend, because I wasn't too great at making real friends. I remember a distinct memory where I was playing in my room when I heard an unfamiliar ring, 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 ring. Mommy and Daddy always told me to never answer the phone, but it couldn't hurt to answer my toy phone, could it? I picked it up, clutching my plush owl to my chest.
Hello?
I said.
Hi. Is your mother home?
A deep smoker-sounding voice answered. I knew that, 1, I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, and 2, I wasn't supposed to answer the phone. But Mommy or Daddy might know this man. So, I called Mommy. She rushed to my room, probably assuming I was hurt, looking exactly like a mother with a pink apron on and holding my toddler brother to her waist. What is it, Anna?
Someone wants to talk to you.
I explained, handing her the phone. She held it up to her ear, smiling, thinking that I was playing a game. Hello? She said, not actually expecting a reply. I heard the same deep rumbling noise coming from the phone. I could only make out 3 separate words. Leave, consume, and hell. Mommy's face went pale and slack. She set my brother down, told me to make sure he didn't get hurt or eat anything, and ran upstairs to alert Daddy. We stayed at my aunt's house for a few weeks after that. When my parents were sure it was safe, we finally got to go back home. I don't remember anything unusual along those lines that happened in the rest of my childhood. A couple decades later, on a Mother's Day, Mom suddenly mentioned this story to me. She didn't tell me anything other than he told her his name was Mr. Smith. She still won't tell me anything else. Not much later, while eating out at a restaurant, a waiter asked me if I was Anna, and after I said yes, handed me a wireless home phone and told me a Mr. Smith wanted to speak with me. I declined and nervously continued eating. But the freakiest part is Mr. Smith just called. He asked why we never talk anymore. When I was little, I don't know, I'd say about 8 or so, I badly wanted a Furby. My parents tried and tried to get their hands on one so I could be greeted by the talkative toy under the Christmas tree. But at the time, they were so popular, getting one at all would have been quite the feat. Of course, like many other parents in the release year of Furbies, they had no luck getting one for me. I was a little disappointed that Christmas, but even though I was a kid, I was still aware of supply and demand. During Christmas break, a couple of my friends came over, and I was envious of both of them. They both had Furbies. I frowned some as I watched the 2 other girls laugh as their Furbies communicated and played together. Jessica got a spotted gray one with a white stomach and a pink mohawk. Amanda's was a pure white one with blue eyes, just like I wanted. I pouted, but I did my best to be happy for them. After a while, they went back home. My parents clearly could tell how upset I was. January came and went, And even for my birthday, there was no Furby to be found. I did the usual. I pouted and sulked like the little brat I was and settled for brushing the manes and tails of the My Little Pony dolls I had. I would watch cartoons and fussily flip the channel every time a Furby commercial came on. Eventually, my mom got a phone call and ended up crying her eyes out like something awful had happened. Of course, curious and bored with my dolls, I got up to see what was wrong.
Mommy, what happened?
She hugged me tight. Your cousin Jennifer? She began stammering, only to sob loudly. Jennifer was much older than me. She was 16 at the time. She won't be there when we go see Aunt Becky.
Why?
She's in heaven now, sweetie. I knew what that meant. I didn't know Jennifer so well, but when I did see her, she was always very nice to me, even though I didn't like the music she listened to very much. The men always seemed angry or sad. My tastes changed as I got older. Simply put, Jennifer was really depressed and always wore black. I didn't know at the time, but she was what older people referred to as goth. I just knew that my aunt would be very upset. This just meant we had to go see her. Becky was very distraught when we showed up. My mom didn't think I would come along, but I begged and pleaded, hoping I could find a way to cheer my aunt up. It would be strange without Jennifer there, but my mother decided that attending her funeral may be a good way to learn about coping with death. The funeral was open casket. Jennifer looked almost like she was just peacefully sleeping. I cried, simply because I knew she wouldn't wake up. She wouldn't play patty cake with me anymore. She wouldn't tell me scary stories, and she wouldn't tell me cool things about spiders anymore. As the casket finally lowered into the ground, I quietly murmured, "Good night, Jenny." After the funeral, I went into her room. The empty pill bottle, there was no label, so I don't know what it was still on the floor. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but my mom and her sister were discussing what was found during the autopsy. Jenny had overdosed on Valium and consumed alcohol, which is what killed her. A few things were taken out of her room. Her journal contained entries about how she wanted to die, and how she hated herself. Nobody ever knew she felt that way. I especially didn't. It made me sad. She always seemed so happy when I'd visit. I heard both Becky and my mother weeping. They came into Jenny's room and glanced around. Becky insisted that all of her posters needed to be taken down and whatnot. She wanted to clear the room of all her old things. My mother explained to me later that sometimes when someone dies, the people who love them don't want to see what that person had because it would upset them. I just thought Becky really hated Marilyn Manson and Nirvana. After a while, I ended up collecting a pile of things that Becky wanted to throw out. I had a stack of CDs full of music that terrified most kids my age, and a few posters that went with them. Becky fussed at me, wondering why I wanted such scary things. My answer was simple. Jenny liked them, and I liked Jenny, so I like them too. My mother just shook her head, looking at Becky. She was basically telling her not to even try it. She knew how stubborn I was. But after collecting that stack of things, I stared at the bookshelf across the room. I saw a Furby there. It might not have been the color I wanted, but it was still a Furby. It was pure black, but I would expect something like that from Jenny.
Aunt Becky, can I have the Furby too?
She only nodded, biting her lip to fight off some tears. She took it from the shelf and handed it to me. It was a long ride back home, but I was playing with Jenny's old Furby, so I felt fine. It was sitting neatly on top of the manual. Speaking its silly language, I would respond to it in English. My mother seemed relieved that she didn't have to buy me one, but at the same time, distraught by my cousin's death. She talked to Becky a lot after that. I would often read to the Furby, and I started listening to the music that Jennifer left behind. My friends didn't like it, so I didn't play it when they were around. They brought their Furbies over to meet mine, only to be shocked by what happened. The Furby's green eyes stared blankly into the blue eyes of Amanda's white one. Its mechanical voice uttered something that startled us.
Me no like you.
Amanda looked a little unnerved and scooped her Furby up into her arms and gave me a strange look. I didn't teach it that, I swear. I told them how I got it, and Jessica, the most superstitious of us, said it was probably haunted or cursed. I told her not to be silly. We tried to make it interact with hers, but my Furby only closed its eyes and fell asleep, despite the others' friendly attempts to sing and whatnot. I sighed and shook my head. I guess I need to reset it or something. The other girls nodded. Taking a pen, I pressed the button on the underside of it. After it opened its eyes, it said something that I didn't think was normal.
Me so cold. Me so cold.
I stared into the green eyes. They reminded me of Jennifer's. That night, my friends and I had a sleepover. We all had our Furbies, but mine decided to be antisocial and sleep the whole time. We watched movies and talked about things that normal little girls would talk about. We laughed and told scary stories and even picked on Amanda for having a crush on this boy named Kevin. They picked on me for one boy that I really didn't like, but it was obvious he liked me. I just made gagging motions, resulting in laughter. After we slept, we had breakfast together and they went home. Afterwards, my Furby woke up. I tried to feed it by depressing its tongue.
Me no hungry.
I frowned. I rubbed its back to mimic petting. It responded with,
Boo.
Which meant no. I was annoyed again. I prodded its belly in an attempt to tickle it. It let out a sound that sounded like a bored sigh. This was really irritating me.
No play.
I didn't expect this at all. This wasn't how my friends' Furbies acted. It just sat there with its eyes wide open, staring and doing nothing aside from the occasional yawn or sigh. When talking to my mother about it, she explained that's how Jennifer acted toward Becky during her last days. It went to sleep after a while. The next day, I woke it up and it responded,
Let me sleep.
It fell asleep as usual, but this time, It opened its eyes after it fell asleep, though judging by its silence, it wasn't awake. I told my mom because it started to creep me out, and she gave me a strange look.
"What's wrong, Mama?"
Those were Jennifer's last words. After that, we removed the batteries from the Furby. When I was looking around for it to sell on eBay due to collectors out there, I couldn't find it. Good riddance, I say. To this day, the thought of its open, lifeless green eyes still disturbs me. It witnessed my cousin's death, and sometimes I wonder if her soul is trapped inside. She had a disturbed side that I never knew, and all of the bad in her could have been implanted in the toy that rested so innocently on her bookshelf. It is the thing that Hollywood horror films are made of. Even more particularly, if it is reminiscent of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. An unnamed family, similar to any other average family, did what all families do as the children start to grow up. They decided that the outgrown toys cluttering the kids' rooms should be got rid of or stored away. As usually happens with many things that were cherished by the children, several of them were stored away in the attic. Among them was a doll, an ordinary baby-faced doll. Run the clock forward 11 years. Attics do not have an endless capacity for storage, or perhaps the family had decided to move to a new home. For whatever reason, a sort-out was needed. If your imagination is the director of this story, then now is the time to pick your lighting and camera angle. Because one can only imagine the horror on the face of the person, or the hairs sticking up on the back of the neck, when they picked up that doll to find this. The doll had aged, and now had the face of a very old person. The skin was drawn back to an almost zombie-like or even mummified appearance. What makes it more unnerving to look at are the human qualities of it, particularly those eyes which appear to be staring straight at you. What had caused this? Could it be demonic forces set to work? Or was it like Dorian Gray's portrait, and had withered and aged? For whatever reason it had happened, the family were not keeping it, and simply gave it away. Apparently, after the family had given it away, the doll was later sold for a considerable amount of money. What it looks like now, we can only guess at. And what caused it, we can only speculate on. Ever heard of a game called Nightmare? Like a lot of other games in the 90s, it came with a VHS which timed with your play. The character on the video would give you instructions on what to do while you played the game in real time. Well, being a scaredy cat, I refused to play it when my mom bought it for us. My brother was disappointed about not being able to play Nightmare, but my mom had a solution. She brought out Rap Rat. It was a cheap, dingy little thing catered to kids my age. You went around the board, collected cheese, and the first player to reach the end would win. It seemed simple enough. And since it reminded us of Mousetrap, which we didn't have, there were no objections. We popped the movie into the VHS and set up the board. The first part of the video was just simple explanation of the rules as well as instructions on how the game worked. Then, Rap Rat came onto the TV. He was not what any of us had been expecting. My smaller brother, who was only 3 at the time, immediately left the room, crying. The rat did not even resemble a rat. The ears were far too big. It had a mouth lined with 2 teeth, and the inside of the mouth looked almost swollen. The most striking part about the thing, though, was the eyes. They were large, glassy, and fish-like. I asked, then bothered, then begged my mom to turn it off. Rap Rat suddenly shouted loudly, screaming and wailing, saying,
"Wait your turn!"
in a demonic, low-pitched voice that was not at all like his normal, obnoxious, nasally voice. In the background, we could hear the narrator saying,
"He's Rap Rat. He's the boss."
over and over again in an overly serious tone. The video was indescribable. Images crossed the screen in quick succession, overcut with Rap Rat's expressionless eyes. The images were some of the things I was afraid of at the time. A person looking over a balcony, a hornet slowly stinging someone's eye, an extreme close-up of a tarantula, a pit full of writhing cobras, and a bloody syringe filled with green fluid. We immediately turned the video off, and I ran out of the room screaming, slamming my door. It took my mom 20 minutes to convince me that the video was gone, that I would never ever see it again. I had nightmares all week about Rap Rat. That wasn't the last time I saw Rap Rat. While my girlfriend and I were preparing to move in together, I was cleaning out the closet of my room and found Rap Rat again, with the same VHS and the same game board inside. It was almost perfectly intact, save for a thick layer of cobwebs and dust bunnies on top of it. This was strange. Didn't my mother get rid of it? And what was the game doing in my room? I let out a bit of a gasp when I found it, and my girlfriend came into the room, asking what was the matter. Breathing harshly, I said, "Rap Rat." She laughed a bit, asking if it was a joke. I shook my head, explaining that it wasn't. She didn't believe me. Nobody did, and I decided that the only way to prove it to her was to show her the video. I borrowed my neighbor's VHS and played the video for her. However, the images had changed. I saw a clown, its nose bursting and spraying blood on the screen. I saw a woman alone in a dark room. I saw a man being forced to pick up white-hot metal and hold it in his outstretched hand, turning his hand into a leathery mess. The scratching I heard as a child continued, picking up louder and louder. Then Rap Rat showed up and began twisting and convulsing, its arms thrusting this way and that. The costume wasn't a costume anymore. The felt was real fur. Its face wasn't plastic, but instead a bristle of thorns with its teeth. The eyes turned inwards and suddenly popped out again. Rap Rat's huge fish eyes were inside out, staring right at me, watching my every move, my every expression, and it grinned widely and gestured at my girlfriend with a single outstretched, inhuman hand. I could hear the faintest scratching at my front door. The TV went blank and showed static. The scratching got louder. It wasn't scratching anymore, but thumping. The thumping of tiny feet on wood. My girlfriend embraced me in fear, and my senses kicked in. Before anything else could happen, I stopped the video, ejected it, and unplugged the VHS. The scratching stopped. When I looked out the living room window, nothing was there. The police showed up soon after, warning us that a neighbor had seen a figure outside of our door and had called in concern. My girlfriend and I simply couldn't explain what had happened and had to tell the police officer that it was us. I was furious that a children's game was terrifying me. I went to pick up the tape, but the VHS burned my hand. It felt like I had touched a Bunsen burner on the highest setting. We had to get the oven mitts from the kitchen in order to take it out, and even then it was scorching hot. I brought it outside, tossed it down on the sidewalk, and crushed it with my winter boots. My girlfriend and I had nightmares every night. We would both wake up in the middle of the night and describe eerily similar images that we saw in our sleep. The scratching would always be there at night, when lights were off and the room was pitch black, save for the moonlight coming in through the window. Now, though, the scratching would happen every time I went near the front door, and every time we said Rap Rat's name. It sounded as if something very small was dragging something across the ground outside of our door, pacing and waiting. I would simply wait, with the covers pulled up to my neck, until I succumbed to exhaustion. At this point, I was determined to sue the company for damages. The first thing I did was call my mother and ask where she got Rap Rat. She had no idea. I found a merchant who sold versions of Rap Rat and asked how I could get in touch with the company. He sent me this email. I don't know about the game, but I know it was created by the same people who created Nightmare. The company is called A Couple of Cowboys. Try them. I did a lot more research and discovered that the company became defunct in 1994. Only 2 years after the company created Rap Rat. I discovered why they did soon after. How Rap Rat came to be. In 1992, the year of the game's development, a couple of cowboys had commissioned a manufacturing company in Haiti to create the doll portrayed in the game. The company who created the puppet ran a sweatshop, where they forced women and children to produce the various components of the puppet, including the felt and plastic of the doll. One day, a young Haitian girl got her arm caught in the industrial sewing machine. The spring loader, unable to handle the weight of the machine, came loose and struck the child's neck, killing her instantly. A few days after the funeral, the mother of the child came to the factory, demanding to see the owner, who denied that he had anything to do with it. In a fit of rage, the mother said that the blood from the innocent would seep into every crevice of the doll, every component with which it was created, and all who touched it would die. She claimed to have summoned a fear demon, and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Apparat will curse you!" The owner simply laughed and told his corporate bosses about Apparat. They spread the joke from person to person, and the game was renamed Rap Rat, a loose anagram of Apparat. Each recitation of the name Apparat brought with it a greater and greater curse. Only 2 years after Rap Rat was created, the company was shut down, and the owners hired by Mattel. There were stories of the workers begging for days off, skipping work for weeks and weeks, finding the puppet in strange places. Sooner were the stories of suicides. Grim, violent suicides in which the workers would stab their hands and burn themselves to death, writing "I am fear" on the nearest surface in blood. Nobody knows where the Rat doll went after the original creators disappeared. Some say that the last things the victims saw before going insane were large, sunken, fish-like eyes. So, words of warning. Never, ever say apparat out loud. Saying a demon's name out loud is an invitation to them, a calling. If you have already done this, it cannot be undone. Do not try to speak to or contact apparat. Avoid being awake between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. when Rat is most likely to try to scare you. The VHS is back. I thought I stomped on it and smashed it to Kingdom Come, but it's back. I found it in my sock drawer yesterday. But this time I was ready. A whole bunch of people have been contacting me, trying to get the tape or some sort of video from the board game. My answer to you is that it's just too dangerous. If I did that, it could very well drive you insane or scare you to death. The video, the game, and Rat itself has some sort of strange power. Rat follows me everywhere I go. I see little shadows in the corner, or hear sounds coming down the hallway when I'm the only one home. If Rat is there, it will let you know. But it will never let you see it. Until it's too late, of course. A lot of people have been watching the normal video from the normal board game. But that's the thing. Rat can be normal. It will trick you into thinking it's just a puppet. And then stalk you, day and night. The following account is taken from a childhood memory of mine. The memory of a Monday afternoon that would drastically alter the course of my life. Admittedly, I'm reluctant to remember it, but I'm motivated by the idea of finally gaining some closure over my parents' deaths, and the nature of such. If anyone has any information surrounding this instance, or any of a related nature, I would very much appreciate it if you could get in touch with me. To those who are not familiar with the event in question, let this serve as a warning. The following account is not for the faint of heart, nor for those who are easily offended. With that, we begin. When I was around 6 or 7, my grandmother took me to one of her neighbor's yard sales. I say it was her neighbor's, rather it was his family who had arranged it, in order to sell the possessions he left after his death a few months prior. The result was a collection of oddities, collected over years of travel, along with some heirlooms left to him by his father. Among these were medals from both World Wars, a pocket watch with a cracked face that had stopped ticking at 3:23, an old phonograph complete with wax cylinders that had never been played, and a baseball flung through the air of a bygone age. As a child, I was completely uninterested in such things, and instead continued up to the table nearest the house. It was there that my eye caught sight of a friendly face. A teddy bear, with eyes of black beads staring back at me, and a cheeky grin soon onto its face. However, what interested me about the bear was its unique composition. The years had obviously taken their toll, and pieces of it had been torn off under whatever set of circumstances. In what had obviously been an effort to repair the bear, pieces of other stuffed animals had been stitched onto it. Pieces of other stuffed animals had been stitched onto it to fill in the torn-away gaps, the different colors making the seams obvious. A single toy rabbit ear hung on one side of its head, while the foot of a dinosaur made up its left leg, along with other bits and pieces of material that I couldn't identify. Needless to say, I had to have it. On the car ride home from my grandmother's, I thought up the name that would haunt me for the next 23 years. Patches. It was nice to have a friend. We went everywhere with each other. Walks, vacations, long car journeys. Neither of us needed to have spoken. We merely felt the bond of loving friendship, like you do with your first stuffed animal. His big black eyes and mismatched body parts would always bring me comfort. Only now do I actually realize why. You see, when you're a kid, you are constantly learning from those around you. Family, friends, even strangers. We incorporate their characteristics into our everyday lives, sewing them into our personalities, and, in the end, they from the people we grow up to be. We are all chimeras, parts of other people brought into one solitary individual. It seemed, though, that I had a knack for picking up the worst characteristics in everybody. My dad's lack of anything interesting to say, my aunt's screeching laugh, my mother's mistrust of ethnic minorities. That's why I loved Patches. Only he could share this with me. He, too, was a hybrid of all the worst parts. His outsides represented my insides. One day, my mother, father, and I were walking in the woods near our house. We lived at the edge of town, so the woods continued on for a fair distance beyond where we would normally walk. I don't remember much of what we did or where we went into the woods. I vividly recall the sickening feeling I had when we approached the gate leading out. Patches, who had been around my shoulders at the time in a piggyback, was no longer there. I burst into tears, trying frantically to remember where I had dropped him. My dad backtracked through where we had come, but to no avail. Patches was gone. I remember running, breaking away from my mother and down the route where my father had recently returned from, scouring the undergrowth for any sign of my lost companion. By this time it was getting dark, the sun having set behind the towering trees, and we would have to go home. However, before my parents caught up to me, I saw something moving in the ferns and fallen leaves. It moved erratically, almost in spasms, unlike any bird, fox, or other woodland animal that I've ever seen since. However, I couldn't see its body. Its movements only made visible by its impacts with the plant life, like the wake of a boat that had already crossed the horizon. I did not stop crying that night. I laid awake into the early hours, wishing, praying for my best friend to return to me. I did not stop crying the next morning. I did not stop crying on the way to school, during school, or on the bus ride home from school. My eyes were red and raw from constant rubbing. It was mid-November, and by the time the school bus dropped me off at home, It was well into the twilight hour. Something was wrong. The air was funny, as it is after a thunderstorm, despite it being good weather all day. The front door to my house was open, which never happened in case Molly, our dog, got out onto the road. I walked into silence. The kitchen was desolate, although my mother was always in there at this time trying to make dinner. Nobody had bothered to turn on any lights either. So, being the responsible child that I was, I made my way into the living room and switched the tall lamp on. I don't know what I felt next. In hindsight, it was horrific, but at the precise moment, I cannot honestly tell you what I felt. It was a bloodbath. The cream carpet was stained red, blood already slightly drying and browning. What looked like chunks of flesh littered the floor, along with what looked like some teeth, both canine and human. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I was paralyzed, too frightened to breathe. I dream of the next thing quite often. It permeates my sleep, its timeless sound reaching my ears to wake me up, screaming, yet still I don't know how to describe it. The best I can come up with is this. Imagine the sound of a foghorn mixed with some form of moaning, with hints of slurred speech commonly associated with recent stroke patients, although the words are lost to the ears. This sound was followed by a dragging noise and some dull thuds followed by wet splats. I didn't know what to do or what to say. All I could do was watch as the thing rounded the door and joined me in the living room. I only glanced at it. That was enough. It stood there, a mess of flesh, bone, and blood. From its head dangled a rabbit's ear, probably from the woods, along with other parts of woodland animals to give form to some makeshift limbs. A poorly formed rib cage stuck out at odd angles from its chest, as if it had been turned inside out. Its lower jaw was that of a dog's, later identified as Molly's, flopping up and down with sickening waving motions as it tried to form words. The top half of its head was made from a human skull, my father's, although it had taken the skin from my mother's face and crudely soldered it over the right eye socket. Nestled in its face were two black eyes. Molly's eyes. They stared back at me, in both numbing despair and pleading sympathy. Everything came back to me. I ran straight across the room, screaming until I tasted blood, out into the backyard, slamming the back door behind me. As I ran, I could hear the thing moaning and shouting some slurred, gurgled words after me, which I would only be able to make out in hindsight. I stumbled and fell as I made my way through the backyard, hearing it slamming itself against the screen door, gurgling screams and cries after me. I did not go back to that house. I ran to my grandmother's, 2 miles away. Hours later, they cordoned it all off. Forensic scientists and police were all over it. They never told me what they found. All I gathered was that they found the creature lying at the back door where I had left it. Obviously, it had no knowledge of how to operate doors, and so had slammed its head against the door multiple times, fracturing its skull. You don't need to be a doctor to point out the cause of death. It couldn't have lived for over a few hours. Its bastardized mimicry of the human body was simply too crude to allow its survival. That thing's existence defied all possible reasoning. All that could be concluded was that nothing human had a part in its creation. The only piece of evidence found was an object held in the creature's right hand, formed out of my mother's hand and a badger's clawed paw. A stuffed bear composed of multiple parts, with a bunny ear on the right side of its head, and 2 black eyes staring back. I do not know what that thing was. All I can think of is the small thing rummaging through the undergrowth. Whatever it may have been, it butchered my parents, my dog. Yet I still feel sorry for the sad form that lay at my back door that Monday afternoon. For in those gargled screams lay 2 distinct words. 2 words that lie in the back of my mind and wait to torment me in the night.
Patches. Friend.
A few months ago, I had a friend who I went to visit. He lived in an old colonial house, just like a lot of people in New England. But something about his house seemed off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until, at some point, I saw one of the rabbits. The rabbits. They were everywhere. Every mantel, every table, every dresser, every windowsill. The rabbits were so ubiquitous, they just blended into everything, but once your eyes caught one, it was inevitable that you would notice that they were everywhere. I asked him, as politely as possible, "Hey, what's up with the, what's up with all the rabbits?" "Oh yeah," he said. "When I was like 5 or 6 years old, my grandmother asked me what I wanted for my birthday. You know, what I liked. I told her I liked rabbits, so she got me a stuffed rabbit. I liked it, and she was so happy to have actually given a gift that was liked. You know, to actually get something right for someone who she really didn't know the likes or dislikes of, so she started giving me them. For every birthday, every Christmas, every year. Every Easter was pretty rabbit applicable too. Sometimes I would just get rabbits in the mail for no apparent reason at all. Funny thing is, a lot of the rabbits came in, like, really, really old packages. They were always dirty and stained. Most of the ones in the mail had no return address. He figured that since his grandmother was, as you'd expect, incredibly old, she was just forgetful and probably clumsy. Getting weird old packages from a weird old lady was something he didn't think much about. I told him, wow, that's really weird. Then I asked him, why don't you just get rid of them, or, I don't know, at least pack them up and store them away somewhere? He said that he'd tried that, but every time he did, before he knew it, they were back. He said, I'm sure that my mom or someone brought them up from the basement if she knew that my grandmother would be visiting, so it wouldn't hurt her feelings or anything like that. I asked him how many times he had done this. It was weird, actually. He honestly couldn't remember. Eventually, I just stopped asking him questions when it became clear that he didn't want to talk about the rabbits anymore. Finally, he just cut me off and said, "Listen, when it's your own house, you just don't even notice something like that." A short while after that, he said he wasn't feeling very well, so I excused myself and drove home. A few nights later, I started having, well, nightmares about the rabbits. There were all different kinds of rabbits. Some of them were from my friend's house, some that I had never seen before. There was always something a bit off about them. The nightmares became more intense as they became more frequent, and as the weeks turned into months, I finally decided to call my friend and talk with him about it. I felt silly, but I felt that if I just told him, someone who knew where the rabbits were from, maybe we'd both have a good laugh and I could stop thinking about them so much. When I called his cell phone, it had been disconnected. I called his house phone, and an elderly lady picked up and said that my friend had been very sick, and that things didn't look good for him. I asked her, "Well, what happened? What did he have?" She said that he had been in the hospital for about 2 months, which was about as long as it had been since the last time I had gone to visit him. I was, as expected, concerned. I had no idea anything bad had happened. Then, when I asked her if she was my friend's grandmother, she just hung up. A few days later, I found a package on my doorstep. No labels on it. Looked like it had been sealed up in an attic for years. Tried to convince myself that I should just throw it away or just open it. I mean, even if there's a rabbit inside it, it wouldn't mean... I mean, it's not like if I threw it away, it would show up on my door again. Even thinking that is, well, it's so ridiculous. My friend hasn't gone back to school this semester, and every time I've tried to call either his cell phone or his house, there's no answer. Every time I drive by his place, there's no car, no lights on either. I mean, even thinking about if I opened that box, that he might not... if something were to happen, but honestly, who would ever even think that? I've never been a superstitious person, but I'll leave it at this. If you ever find yourself in someone's home that has a whole collection of something they never asked for, that they can't manage to throw away, I wouldn't stick around too long. I haven't always been scared of dolls, but recently they have been getting on my nerves. It's like they can read me. It started out with a prank. My father would set the doll in my room to scare me. I brushed it off as harmless, just bring the doll back to him, and going on with my day. Since then, I have moved out, and I live on my own, and I refuse to have any putrid dolls in my house, due to my everlasting fear of them. Everywhere I go, I see them. I do not just see any doll, but the one my father had used to torment me. I didn't notice it at first, catching just a slight glimpse of it in my peripheral vision. When I first started to see it, it was on a park bench, or sitting in a coffee shop. But then it got closer. I had been working all week, and wanted the weekend to rest. Friday night, I get home, walk in the door, glance around as if it were a ritual, and continue after noticing nothing out of the ordinary. But then, I noticed. Stuff was misplaced. Stuff was missing. It was nothing at first, but then it got to be heavier stuff, like my whole table. With me on the verge of insanity, I decided to go to my parents for the weekend. Upon arrival, we talked a bit, and after a while of conversing, I bring up the fact that weird stuff had been happening. I mentioned, too, that I noticed the doll they used to terrorize me. The shock and horror on their faces was unbelievable. "We've never owned any dolls before," they said. I sunk. My insides exploded. I went insane. The whole rest of the weekend they could barely look at me. I left early Sunday morning. 3-hour drive. And it was all spent thinking about that doll. Finally at home, I reach for my keys, unlock the door, and drop my stuff. Walking in, I saw it. The red eyes, red hair, white face. It just sat there and glared at me.
Welcome home,
It said with a reassuring smile. Audrey Parvus was turning 10 this year. May 8th was on Sunday, and it was Saturday afternoon. Audrey, being a terrible person at dropping hints, her mother brought her to the 99-cent stores, letting her choose her own birthday present.
Now just look around and let me know if you see anything. I'll be looking at the novels over here,
her mother had told her. A knick-knack here, a curio there. It was a quaint little shop. Audrey didn't know what to get. There were so many things to choose from. She'd just about settled on a stuffed rabbit toy when she saw it in the window display. A beautiful old Victorian doll with brown hair and brown eyes, with a red dress and blue trim.
"Oh, she's so pretty,"
she said, in awe of the beauty of the doll. She happily skipped to her mother and brandished the doll. Ms. Parvus raised the doll up like Audrey did.
"Wow, something like this in a simple 99-cent store? I can buy it, dearie."
She handed it back to Audrey, who ran to the old cashier.
"I'd like to buy this doll, please, sir,"
she asked politely. The old man squinted at the doll and said, "Oh, no, you wouldn't want that doll." Confused, Audrey asked,
"What? Of course I want this doll."
He just shook his head and said, "Well, all right, but..." His next words were mumbled under his breath. She took the doll off the counter and held on to it as Ms. Parvus paid for a few books. On the way home, she couldn't stop looking at the doll. Such ornate features, done with perfect accuracy. Such a beautiful doll needed a name.
"Molly. Her name is Molly."
She hugged the doll tight on the way home. Upon closer inspection after arriving home, Audrey noticed a flaw. Molly had an extra finger on her right hand. Audrey pinned this as weird, but nothing is perfect. After playing with the doll for the entire day, it was bedtime at 9 o'clock. The doll was porcelain, so Audrey left Molly on the living room table to play with her after breakfast. The doll was porcelain, so Audrey left Molly on the living room table to play with her after breakfast. Her mother kissed her goodnight and walked down the stairs to her bedroom. Audrey had lovely dreams. Her playing with a living Molly in a meadow, and dreams such as that. Then she awoke, hearing a clacking. Tiny, but audible, clacking footsteps. They grew in volume, sounding like they were getting closer to Audrey's bedroom. Then, there was a high-pitched mumbling. Audrey stopped whimpering and listened closely.
First step. First step. Molly's on the second step. Molly's on the third step.
Refusing to take any more, Audrey yelled out, "Mommy! Mommy, come quickly!" The tiny footsteps pattered away, and Ms. Parvis rushed to her daughter's room. What is it?"
Mommy, I heard footsteps, and I think it was Molly.
Her mother sighed, unhappy at being awoken at 11:15 at night. She took Audrey and turned on the light in the living room. Molly had not moved an inch from her position. Audrey unhappily went back to bed. As her mother left to rest, she managed to get 30 minutes of rest before the sing-song chanting and clacking returned. The chanting continued past 3.
Molly's on the fourth step. Molly's on the fifth step. Molly's on the sixth step.
Calling her mother again, Audrey insists she believes it's Molly who's making the noises. Another checkup on Molly reveals no change. Audrey Veronica Parvis, I really am getting tired of this act. Molly is a doll. She can't walk, she can't talk, and there's nothing to be scared of. Audrey looked uneasily at Molly. The longer she stared, the more Molly's expression looked malicious. I have work overtime tomorrow, and you have daycare. So please sleep and forget about Molly. She'll seem less scary during the day.
Alright, Mommy.
She solemnly climbs the stairs to her room and lies in bed. She manages to get some sleep when the clacking and chanting come back. It exceeded the 6th step and continued. There were only 12 steps to her room.
Molly's on the 7th step. Molly's on the 8th step. Molly's on the 9th step. Mommy!
She couldn't help yelling out. Her mother didn't respond.
Molly's on the 10th step. Molly's on the 11th step. Mother!
She screamed out. Silence was her response.
Molly's on the 12th step.
There was silence in those heart-pounding seconds. But the doorknob jangling broke that silence. The door creaked open. There stood Molly, holding a steak knife, all bloody. Audrey scrambled under her bed, hoping Molly didn't see her.
Molly killed your mommy. Now Molly is gonna kill you.
She grabbed Audrey by the hair and pulled her out from under the bed. Pointing the knife towards the little girl, she said,
Molly's in your room.
On the corner of Cedar Boulevard and 24th Avenue, Molly is still in the window display in the 99-cent store, still run by the same old man. She's waiting for another victim to fall for her charms. She now has 8 fingers on her hand. I gave her the doll on her birthday. She loved it at first, and told me it was so beautiful, that its hair was so soft and the dress was so pretty. She wouldn't let it out of her sight for days. Through the daylight hours, she set it on the table, so she could see it while cleaning the house, and at nighttime it sat next to the bed, watching us sleep with big, blue, unmoving eyes. But my daughter's love for the doll soon changed. Soon I noticed something was bothering her. I asked, of course, but she wouldn't tell me at first. She said she was just being silly. I could notice that day after day she became more reserved towards me, until I just couldn't take it anymore. I pressed her, told her she would tell me what was going on right now, or I would drag her to a doctor. She told me it was the doll. It scared her. She told me she had the feeling it was constantly watching her. Sometimes it even seemed like it moved. This worried me, and I went to take a look at the doll. It sat motionless on the little table in the bedroom, the big blue eyes unchanged. I couldn't help but sigh from relief a bit. Of course she's not moving. She couldn't have been moving. I went to turn away, but then saw a tiny movement from the corner of my eye. I turned back to the doll. Picking it up from the table, I held my face close to the doll's, staring into the eyes. Something was moving. I tried to concentrate, tried to look closer. Yes, there it definitely was. Movement, but not from the eye itself. It was behind the eye. Before I could register this, the eye burst, and out of it spilled at least 10 wriggling maggots. I dropped the doll in shock, backing away instinctively. My daughter yelled from the other room, asking me what was going on. I yelled back at her not to worry. I picked up the doll again, using a tissue to wipe away the maggots. Inside, I saw more, pressing against the skin and plastic outer layer. So soon already. I had hoped she would have lasted longer. I'll have to get a new one for her. Maybe keep it alive at first. That way it'll last longer for sure. While I throw away the old doll, I think about how my daughter always says she loves the thick blonde curls of little Katie down the block. Doesn't she also have blue eyes? Halloween is probably my favorite holiday. I dress up in a homemade costume, I hand out treats, and I am the light of any All Hallows party. Although I eagerly participate, I refuse to decorate for Halloween. It's my mom's fault. See, when I was about 15 years old, my mother worked at a local hotel. She was a night shift restaurant manager there. Since she was also a kleptomaniacal pack rat, she took decorations home with her very, very often. Shortly after Halloween, she brought home this ugly little decoration. It was a plastic skeleton, dressed in a top hat and tails. The skeleton was about the size of a 3-year-old child. It was painted a dim ivory, the color of old bones. She shoved the ugly thing in my face. "Isn't it the greatest? Come closer and check it out," Mom said excitedly. When I got closer, I shrieked as the stupid thing spoke. Well, to be more accurate, it screamed at me, with glowing redness in its empty eye sockets.
Boo! Happy Halloween!
Turned out the skeleton had a battery pack in it that powered 2 red LEDs and a speaker hidden in its skull. Real funny, Mom. Scare your kid out of 10 years of her life. I asked her to take the batteries out of the back. She did so, snickering at her joke, and placed the skeleton in a display alcove directly across from our front door. As the months passed, she dressed Mr. Bones, yes, she named the stupid thing, in different accessories for the holidays. Indian headband on his top hat for Thanksgiving, a fake white beard for Christmas, a glittery bow tie for New Year's. At random, she would put the batteries in again to give me a scare when I got home from school. God, Jesus Christ. Mom, take the batteries out again! I didn't put them back in, honey. She was laughing as she said it, which gave proof to her lie. I hated her pranks. Mom left me home alone a lot at night. It came with her job as a night manager. I dealt with it by playing video games or reading as late as I wanted and eating junk food I had hidden in my room. That didn't always help, though, as sometimes I got this feeling? I would say it was just paranoia, but anyone who has experienced it would never say just paranoia. That makes it seem smaller than it feels. Your mouth goes dry, and no amount of drink makes it feel better. Your stomach keeps doing this strange roll to the side. Your breath becomes shorter, and all you can think about is how stupidly easy it would be for someone to get into your place and make short, bloody, violent use of you. I decided to take the batteries out of Mr. Bones once and for all during one of these fits. I didn't need the stupid thing shrieking at me while I was like this. I took out the batteries and decided to clip one of the wires to make sure it would not go off ever again. As I picked the skeleton up and turned it over, it occurred to me that the decoration was a bit heavy. It felt heavier than plastic should be. I knew the hands were plastic. The little bony hands were obviously made from a bad mold, as was the skull. After I clipped the wire, I opened the tuxedo shirt and felt the ribs. It didn't feel like plastic. It felt colder, a little like stone, a little like wood. There were strange grooves in the area where the heart would be on a normal person. Notches. Like something had been forced there. I had never felt bone, but those ribs felt like how I imagined bone would feel. I quickly buttoned the shirt back up on the doll and flung it into the alcove. I was going to head up to bed, now, and tell Mom about this in the morning. Maybe we could take the doll to the police or give it a proper burial. I turned to head up the stairs. It was said quietly. Not screamed this time. My head whipped around. Light came from the eye holes of the doll's skull, beaming red at the ceiling. After I had clipped its cables and taken out the batteries and... God, what the fuck was going on? What the hell was this thing? I didn't wait for an answer. I ran up the stairs to my room and locked the door. I left all the lights on and refused to come out until morning. My mother promised me she'd take care of the doll. I never saw it again after that. I don't know if she took it to the cops or just threw it away. When I was a small child, I was terrified of the dark. I still am, but back when I was around 6 years old, I couldn't go a full night without crying out for one of my parents to search beneath my bed or in my closet for whatever monster I thought was waiting to eat me. Even with a night light, I would still see dark shapes moving around the corners of the room, or strange faces looking in on me from my bedroom window. My parents would do their best to console me, telling me that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light. But in my young mind, I was positive that the second I fell asleep, the bad things would get me. Most of the time, I would just hide under the blankets until I became tired enough to stop worrying. But every now and then, I would become so panicked that I would run screaming into my parents' room, waking up my brother and sister in the process. After an ordeal like that, there would be no way anyone would be getting a full night's rest. Eventually, after one particularly traumatizing night, my parents had had enough. Unfortunately for them, they understood the futility in arguing with a 6-year-old and knew that they would be unable to convince me to rid myself of childish fears through reason and logic. No, they had to be clever. She collected a large assortment of random pieces of fabric and her sewing machine and created what I would later refer to as Mr. Ickbar Bigglestein, or Ick for short. Ick was a sock monster, as my mother called him. He was made to keep me safe while I slept at night by scaring away all the other monsters. He was pretty damn creepy, I had to admit. Honestly, looking back on it all now, I'm still impressed that my mom could think of something so strange and disturbing looking. Ickbar had the stitched-together look of a Frankenstein gremlin, with big white button eyes and floppy cat ears. His little arms and legs were made from a pair of my sister's black and white striped socks, and the half of his face that was green was made of one of my brother's football socks. His head could be described as bulbous, and for his mouth my mom attached a piece of white fabric and sewed a zigzagging pattern to shape a wide grin of sharp teeth. I loved him at once. From then on, Ick never left my side. So long as it was after dusk, of course. Ick didn't like the sun, and would get upset if I tried to bring him to school with me. But that was okay. I only needed him at night to keep away the boogeymen, which was what he was good at. So every night at bedtime, Ick would tell me where the monsters were hiding, and I would place him near the section of my room closest to the spookiness. If there was something in the closet, Ick would block the door. If there was a dark creature scratching at the window, Ick would be pressed up against the glass. If there was a big hairy beast under my bed, then under the bed he went. Sometimes the monsters weren't even in my room. Sometimes they would hide in my dreams, and Ickbar would have to come with me into my nightmares. It was fun bringing Ick into my dream world, as he and I would spend hours fighting off ghouls and demons. The best part was, in my dreams, Ick could talk to me for real.
How much do you love me?
He would ask.
More than anything,
I would tell him. One night, in a dream, after I had lost my first tooth, Ick asked me for a favor.
Can I have your tooth?
I asked him why.
To help me kill the bad things.
The next morning after breakfast, my mom asked me where my tooth went. From what she told me, the tooth fairy didn't find it under my pillow, When I told her that I gave it to Ikbar, she just shrugged and went back to feeding my little sister. From then on, every time I lost a tooth, I would give it to Ik. He would always thank me, of course, and tell me that he loved me. Eventually, though, I ran out of baby teeth, and I was beginning to get a little too old to still be playing with dolls. So Ik just sat there on my bookshelf, collecting dust, slowly fading away from my attention. Over time, the nightmares, however, became worse than ever. So bad that they even began to follow me to the waking world, terrorizing every dark corner or rustle in the bushes. After one particularly bad night biking home from a friend's house where I swore a pack of rabid dogs were chasing me, I got home to find something strange waiting for me in my room. There, on my bed, standing fully upright in the soft glow of the moonlight from my window, was Ikbar. At first, I just thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. They had been all evening, so I tried to flick on the lights. Another flick of the light switch, then another, and another, with no change to the darkness. It was then that I started to get nervous. I backed away slowly towards the door behind me, my eyes never leaving the shape of Ik's silhouette, my hand awkwardly outstretched behind, reaching for the doorknob. I was just about to get my ass out of there when I heard the door slam itself shut, locking me into blackness. In nothing but shadows and silence, I stood frozen in place, not even breathing. For how long, I can't say, but after what felt like a lifetime of cold fear, I heard the shrill, familiar voice.
You stopped feeding me, so why should I protect you?
Protect me from what?
Let me show you.
I blinked once, and everything changed. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. It wasn't hell, but the comparison wasn't far off. It was some sort of forest, a horrible, nightmarish place where partial embryonic abortions hung from the canopy, and the ground swarmed with carnivorous insects. A thick fog wafted through the air, and with it the stench of rotting meat, while chartreuse lightning flashed across the night sky. In the distance, I could hear the agonizing screams of something not quite human. My head throbbed like it was about to explode, the pain forcing out a river of tears. In my mind, I heard his voice again.
This is what your reality would become without me.
I felt earth-shaking footsteps approaching fast.
I'm the only one who can stop it.
It was behind me now, huge and angry, hot breath across my back.
Bring me what I need, and I will.
I woke up before I could turn around. The following day, I raided my parents' closet for my brother's baby teeth, giving them all to Ikbar. Almost immediately, the night terrors ceased, and I was more or less able to go on about my life as normal. From time to time, I would have to sneak into my little sister's room and snatch what was meant for the tooth fairy, or strangle one of the neighborhood cats and pry out its sharp little incisors. Anything to ward off the visions. Anything from a shark tooth necklace to a cavity ridden bicuspid. I also began to notice that Ik would move about my room whenever I left for any length of time, rearranging my stuff and hanging additional curtains. He was even beginning to look more lifelike somehow. In the right light, his teeth would glisten, and he was warm to the touch. As much as he creeped me out, I couldn't work up the courage to just destroy him, knowing perfectly well where that would leave me. So, I went on collecting teeth for Ick throughout all of high school and college. The older I got, the more things I would learn to fear. The more teeth Ick would need to keep me safe. I'm 22 years old now, with a decent job, my own apartment, and a set of dentures. It's been almost a month since Ick's last meal, and the horrors are starting to crowd around me once more. I took a detour through the parking garage after work tonight. Found a man fumbling with his car keys. His teeth were stained yellow from a lifetime of cigarettes and coffee. Even still, I had to use a hammer to get out the molars. When I got back to my apartment, he was waiting for me. On the ceiling, in the corner. 2 white eyes and a mouth of razors.
How much do you love me?
He asks me. More than anything, I reply, taking off my coat. More than anything in the world.